Hey guys, welcome back. Today, as the first video in my branching out effort, I want to talk about what I believe to be one of the most important video game releases in recent years, Elden Ring. Now, you've all undoubtedly heard of it, whether you've been playing From Software's games for years like myself, or whether you're entirely new to their ecosystem. This game has been everywhere and seems to be appealing to more people than oxygen. So today, I want to talk about the success of Elden Ring and why it makes me so hopeful to see a game like this smashing records and taking this entire industry by storm in ways that very, very few titles have before. Nowadays, it feels to me like many games try too hard to reinvent the wheel with every title, assuming that their success will come from the pure novelty of something new or the addition of features that all of its competitors seem to have, regardless of whether or not these features fit with the game's formula. Many seem to fall into the trap of assuming that this novelty and homogenization equate to innovation because, in a way, it is technically driving their IP forward into new territory. But From Software have proven that the best kind of innovation is introspective. It comes from honing your craft, from refining what you've already proven works and what you've already proven you can do well. With a majority of their Souls and also Souls-like games, and now Elden Ring as well, FromSoft have shown their incredible ability to innovate within their own ideas. Enough to create a fresh experience, but not so much that they become unrecognizable, as opposed to innovating by integrating Flavor of the Month features present in the current status quo of popular games. Elden Ring feels like a game that simply doesn't care about the rest of the gaming industry. It doesn't care about the trending game features or mechanics of the time. It only cares about itself, about what its predecessors did best, and refining that experience as much as possible, and as such, it's reliant on nothing but itself to attract an audience. In an era of battle passes, microtransactions, weekly rotating item stores, live service games, and games releasing at best 30% complete, Elden Ring is like a shot of adrenaline in the arm of the industry. It almost feels weird to be playing a video game released in 2022 that has none of these currently industry-defining features championed by the status quo, and that simultaneously has this quantity of content at such an absurdly high quality bar. Besides the, admittedly, really frustrating stuttering on PC, every single piece of content that I've experienced so far in this game is polished, has been thought through, and designed in an incredibly intelligent manner. And clearly, I'm not the only one who thinks this. With over 12 million copies sold in its first month, and population figures that dwarf even some of the bigger, more successful live service games out there, Elden Ring should be a reminder to the industry that there's another path to success beyond reinventing the wheel with every title and integrating popular features that simply don't fit your formula. When you instead choose to focus solely on refining your formula and finding ways to keep people engaged and playing within that very formula, you create a far more organic kind of popularity because it's not derived from what's currently trending in the market. It's instead derived from the unique identity that your formula has created, and with Elden Ring, FromSoft have demonstrated more than ever how confident they are in their own tried and tested formula, and have done so to great success. I do find it funny how most AAA games nowadays focus on appealing to a broader audience with every title, an effort that often has the complete reverse effect. Whereas FromSoft chose to do the polar opposite with Elden Ring, allowing the game to retain the identity that its developers had crafted over the last decade and a half, and in doing so, have attracted an even larger audience of players intrigued by that identity. They don't need to string players along with the promise of more content coming in the following weeks or months to keep them interested. This game has no need for seasonal content, for a roadmap, for live service updates, or for the drip feeding of content because its core is so damn fleshed out and content rich. It's so confident that its standard offering provides enough of a unique experience from the get-go that its players will be engaged enough to want to return time and time again, creating that organic sense of engagement, because players aren't returning to the game because they have weeklies or dailies to grind, or to complete a battle pass that expires and vanishes in 2 weeks' time, or to play a new game mode that's been complete since launch but only now is being drip-fed to the players. Not for any of the reasons that most modern games have players returning, but rather, they return because they genuinely love playing the game, and because the core of the game provides enough content to ensure they never run out of new things to experience. So to cut a very long story short, Elden Ring does something that feels totally novel in the current market. It provides a high-quality, content-rich, and unique experience that you won't find anywhere else on the market. It really is as simple as that. But how exactly did it manage such a Herculean feat? One of the most defining traits of Elden Ring and FromSoft's post-Demon's Souls games as a whole is how frequently they reuse assets. Now, to some, this is seen as laziness, but I strongly disagree with that. To me, this shows efficiency. Why try and fix what isn't broken? Instead of spending costly time and resources redesigning everything from the ground up each game purely to create a sense of novelty, why not reuse assets from previous games that did the trick then, and instead spend that time and those resources innovating in other, more impactful areas? Areas that refine the formula, that add longevity, replayability, and further depth to existing features. Obviously, that's not to say that everything in Elden Ring is reused from previous FromSoft games. The game is full of tons upon tons of new assets, and I would assume that almost all of the existing assets got up-resed and upscaled and increased in quality anyway. But I think that with each successive FromSoft title, it's clear that their focus is on refining and improving what already exists over the novelty of everything looking and feeling and sounding totally new. And that leads to another benefit of FromSoft's approach to asset reuse. Now, I'm not sure if this is something that only I feel, or if maybe there are other weirdos out there like me who agree and feel the same way, but when successive games share notable assets like animations, or models, or sound effects, or UI and HUD elements and stuff like that with their predecessors, it creates a sense of familiarity and almost comfort, if that makes any sense. Now, this is something that Bungie used to do a fair bit with their Halo games, and it's also something that Infinity Ward and Treyarch used to do back in the day with Call of Duty as well. When you see these assets from a game that you loved and have an attachment to make a return, whether they're models or animations or UI elements, sound effects, whatever, it doesn't matter what it is, it almost helps you form an attachment with that new game because of the familiarity that it creates with an experience that you're already familiar with and that you already love. I don't know, maybe that's just me getting hyper-attached to, like, the most minute of details? Perhaps it is, but it's how Bungie's Halo games, FromSoft's games, and old Call of Duty games make me feel, and it's an undiscussed element of FromSoft's games that I really appreciate seeing in Elden Ring. Now, going into Elden Ring, one of the biggest debates was the accessibility aspect of From's games. Their staple difficulty has understandably put a fair few people off their games in the past, and as such, there were requests for them to add an easy mode to alleviate the issue, and open up the game to more people. Now, it would have been very easy for From to simply add standard difficulty tiers that almost every other game in existence has, but to do so would have totally undermined the very core of FromSoft's formula. Death and failure are core tenets of the experience. They're your primary learning mechanism as you explore the world and progress your character, and so they chose to address these issues in a far more intelligent manner than just simply adding difficulties. They chose to do so by innovating within their own formula. The addition of summons to take the heat off of you during boss fights, Stakes of Marika to ensure that you don't have to run a marathon every time you die in a boss and run through hordes of enemies just to get back to it. The addition of Torrent, a horse that allows you to rapidly evade and escape open world encounters that are too challenging. And then the open world itself, allowing for much more convenient farming and leveling than before, along with many more paths that you can take to progress through the game, so you don't have to spend 3 weeks being stuck on the same boss. You can instead take a different route or explore a different part of the map. Elden Ring is, without a shadow of a doubt, the most accessible FromSoft game to date, at least in terms of difficulty, and yet they've managed to make it so without sacrificing the toughness of their games or without uprooting the core of their design. Another defining aspect of Elden Ring that, again, is a trait carried forward from From's previous titles that just feels alien in the modern industry, is a rather simple one. This game respects its players' common sense. You notice the little things, like quests not having 17 waypoints on your HUD telling you where to go, and instead requiring you to listen, read, and act on what an NPC is telling you. Or, in some cases, even read between the lines and try and figure out what they're trying to say. Or the map requiring you to actually inspect details on the map itself over just bouncing between 3,000 automatically placed map markers, reading contour lines, looking for map fragment pillars, caves, ruins and the like on the map, and then actually travelling to them and finding what you thought was there on the map is always such a satisfying experience. Now granted, as much as I love this more implicit method of storytelling and navigation, it's by no means perfect. It can be overly confusing at times, and it can leave you scratching your head wondering what the hell you're supposed to be doing, or what the hell this NPC that just spoke like a 15th century bard was on about, but honestly, I see this degree of confusion as a necessary downside to a style of quest design that overall is considerably more fulfilling and rewarding than just following a waypoint on your heads-up display. The more I play and think about Elden Ring and compare it to the rest of the market's offerings at the moment, the more and more convinced I become that this is a game that just won't age. It will stand the test of time like the finest wine in existence, and will be as beloved in 20 years' time as it is now. As incredible as From's previous games were, and as big as Dark Souls and Bloodborne in particular were, Elden Ring seems to have opened FromSoft's iconic formula up to an insanely large audience, far bigger than any of those games ever achieved, and given how far a surprisingly high number of players have actually gotten through the game, as we can see by the achievements, I have a feeling that FromSoft have just expanded their fanbase by at least tenfold at the minimum, despite how inaccessible and punishing of a game Elden Ring may seem. When you create a game like this, where the main draw is the content and the experience present day one, the richness of it, the polish of it, the quality and the quantity of it, and not the promise of more to come in the future, you create a much more organic sense of attachment. Broadly speaking, live service games that do the latter only hold interest as long as that live service continues. When the updates that people have been conditioned to expect every X period of time stop, my assumption, at least, is that they're gonna lose interest, and when interest is lost, players leave, and ultimately, in a worst-case scenario, this leads to your game's service being shut down and the game being unplayable, or in a best-case scenario, it makes your game borderline unplayable because of a low population. In 20 years' time, Elden Ring will still be playable. It will still be as unique and stand out for new and returning players as it is now, because it actually has a unique identity in the overall gaming landscape. It doesn't try to be something that it's not. It doesn't try and ham-fist features from other games and genres into itself because they're trending. It doesn't rely on the drip feeding of content to provide its players with enough dopamine to keep them engaged. In an industry where it feels like the homogenization of feature offerings is becoming even more prevalent by the day, I find myself appreciating games that try and carve out their own identity and don't conform to the status quo more and more. I mean, Death Stranding is a great example, one of my favourite games of the 2010s. So many people tried to laugh this game off as a walking simulator, as if A, that was a bad thing, and B, as if Kojima and co. hadn't spent years crafting an ultra-satisfying gameplay loop of which walking, which they'd managed to somehow make into a sort of Gears of War active reload-esque mini-mechanic, was central to. I love it when games try something new like this, and I just feel like it doesn't happen as often nowadays as it probably should. Just like Death Stranding, it's clear that Elden Ring isn't for everyone. But that's a good thing. When your sole focus with the game is trying to appeal to as broad of an audience as possible, you end up watering down your formula, and oftentimes, what made that game so great in the first place is also watered down in the pursuit of it. FromSoft could have very easily added hundreds of mundane map markers that pop up as soon as you speak to an NPC, or HUD elements and quest waypoints that direct you exactly where you need to go to try and pull in more players. But thankfully, they didn't. I'd rather go through a game and experience periods of feeling lost or having no idea what I'm supposed to be doing, but ultimately end up finding my way to the next objective naturally myself, over having the game just tell me exactly where to go and what to do from the outset. When I find my own path to the objective and complete it on my own volition, I get a much greater sense of reward and satisfaction at the end of it. And I think the same can be kind of said about death in FromSoft games as well. Like many people, I imagine, the first time that I ever played a From game was Dark Souls, and initially the harshness of it really did put me off. I gave up very quickly into my first experience with Dark Souls. But when I realised that death wasn't a failure state like most of the games treat it as, but rather a mechanic that allows you to understand the game's quirks, to learn an enemy or a boss's moveset and monitor your skill progression, suddenly it all clicked. And for a game as punishing as Elden Ring that continues to use what other games classify as a pure failure state as a core learning mechanic, a key part of progression, to be doing so well speaks volumes about its quality. Now, none of this is to say that Elden Ring is an absolutely perfect game with no flaws whatsoever. That is absolutely not the case. The PC port is extremely frustrating to play at times thanks to the god-awful stuttering that, just loves to happen at the worst times. The more hopeful and heroic overall atmosphere, as much as I do enjoy it, just doesn't quite compare to Dark Souls' more melancholic atmosphere of despair and doom, and I think, on the whole, Dark Souls bosses, at least in terms of aesthetics and variation, were superior to Elden Ring. And on the same note as well, that's not to say that all modern AAA live service games are bad either. Warzone and Apex Legends are two fantastic live service games that, in many ways, conform to the current status quo when it comes to their feature set. However, they both provide unique, exciting ways to play in the Battle Royale genre. But Elden Ring proves that there is another path to success. That being faithful to a unique formula, as niche and newcomer unfriendly as it might be, is sufficient for getting people interested, and if that formula is backed up by a healthy volume of well-crafted content, then, well, you might just be onto a winner. Quite honestly, I am still utterly bewildered at both the breadth and the depth of the content this game has. I'm 80 hours in right now, I've just finished the main story, and even still, I've just discovered another massive part of the map that was previously shrouded in mist. Most games, even some of my all-time favourites, often have rather noticeable drops in quality as well during certain parts of the game. There's always that one section in the game where it's like, not a fan of this bit. But that just didn't seem to happen with Elden Ring. I was waiting for it, I was anticipating the next area that I'd find would be the one where I'd be like, oh god, I can't be arsed with this, but it just never came. It's funny because this game, I feel like it almost does the complete polar opposite of that. It literally refuses to stop getting better as you go through it. And I feel like this just once again comes down to how confident the developers at From Software are in their tried and tested formula. They know what works, and they know how to innovate and refine within what works to make an experience that feels both fresh and familiar, both challenging and addictive, and above all else, unique. Elden Ring is yet another entry in FromSoft's long line of titles that proves that if you build a game with a unique identity, they will come. My only concern now is how the hell they're ever gonna top the experience that I had with this game, because it was unlike any other game I've ever played. But honestly, if there's one developer that I can never count out, it's From Software. So, that's my video on Elden Ring. After playing unhealthy amounts of this game over the last month and being sucked into it more than just about any game in recent years, I really felt like putting my thoughts on it into video form, and honestly, what better first video is there for the branching out effort than a video on Elden Ring? If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more variety content like it in the future from me, such as these videos that are on the screen right now and more, then make sure you show your support down below in comments and the likes, and hit sub as well if you haven't done already, all that typical YouTube good stuff. You guys know what to do. And so, with that said, let's round this video out here. I want to give a massive thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual. Thank you all so much. And thank you all so much for watching, especially given that, of course, this isn't a Halo video. This is the first video in a rather ambitious effort to make my channel about far more than just Halo. Of course, Halo's going nowhere, but there's so many other games and experiences that I want to make videos about on this channel, so you guys watching this and supporting it means the world to me. It really, genuinely does. So, once again, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next one, baby.